Well, I wonder if you've ever asked a question like this. God, what on earth are you doing? Why don't you listen to my prayers? Why do you let such bad things happen? We're currently living through a global pandemic, the effects of which will be felt for decades to come. Hundreds of thousands of people have died, and there's been financial and emotional turmoil. Lord, what are you doing? How long must we face this? Would you know that these are the very similar questions to the ones that Habakkuk asked around 2,600 years ago? Let me introduce you to him briefly. First of all, Habakkuk the bloke. What do we know about him as a person? Well, we don't know a huge amount. He doesn't appear elsewhere in the Bible, but he is a prophet. We learn that from the beginning of his book. That means that the message which he spoke in his day and which he speaks to us in our day was and is from God. And it's essential to remember that, so that as we read this book, we bow humbly before our God who speaks to us. We don't know much about when he lived either, but the most likely answer is around 600 years before Jesus, because he speaks of the coming Babylonians who invaded his hometown in Jerusalem around 587 BC. So Habakkuk the bloke. How about Habakkuk the book? Well, Habakkuk is the eighth of what we call the minor prophets. That is, people who spoke God's word towards the end of the Old Testament period, and whose messages were different from the major prophets because they were a little bit shorter. People like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel were the major prophets, the longer prophets. And because Habakkuk's message isn't massively long, it probably only takes about 10 minutes to read it. So why not read it before we look at this book together? It's a really important book because it contains a verse quoted in the New Testament that takes us to the heart of the Christian faith. The righteous person will live by faith. More on that in the series. It'll be a great help to Christians and to those wanting to know more about Christianity. Well, Habakkuk the bloke, the book. And how about Habakkuk the message, or if you want another B, Habakkuk's burden, because that's the literal translation of his oracle or burden, which God gave him to share with the people. Well, even if he did have a long time ago, his message or his burden has an enduring quality because he addresses some timeless questions which every generation struggles with. Namely, why doesn't God stop bad things from happening? And while we won't find all the answers to that, just like we didn't find simple answers when we looked at 3 sermons on the topic of suffering a couple of years ago, we will nevertheless see that Habakkuk found a perspective that took him from perplexity and heartache to confidence and peace. He goes from the beginning of the book, from the question marks, how long must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save, through to peace at the end of the book. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. So I've called the series From Perplexity to Peace. So do join us as me, Matt Gertler, and Tim Chapman lead us through this short book over 3 weeks as we travel with Habakkuk and discover for ourselves this journey from perplexity to peace. We look forward to seeing you, and do have a read of the book before we start.